Good evening. The hour of 6:30 p.m. having arrived, I will call together this special meeting of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. This meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel and the city website. The video is also posted on the city website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the homepage and subscribe to the city meetings email list. The public and other board members will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Anyone who wishes to address the board is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room and identify themselves by name and address prior to speaking. As a reminder, the minute takers participating remotely this evening, board members, please be sure to turn on your microphone when speaking. If the minute taker is unable to hear, they will ask you to speak louder or turn your microphone on. And I believe also at the desk there are also microphones where you can turn it to green when you want to speak. That being said, I'm Jane Taylor. I am usually the vice chair sitting over there, but Attorney Hoppick had a conflict this evening, so he is not sitting on these applications. So with that introduction.
Ed Guyot.
Richard Clough.
We don't have any minutes from the previous meeting because we only met a couple weeks ago. Mr. Clement, do we have any unfinished business?
We do not, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. So that being said, unless anybody else has something, we will move forward with this evening's hearings. I will begin by opening the hearing, and of course, because I don't usually do this, feel free to correct me. ZBA 2024-21, petitioner George Hansel of Tailfeather Strategies requests a variance for property located at 57 Marlborough Street, tax map 590093000. This property is in the Downtown Edge District and is owned by Jared Goodell. The petitioner requests a variance to permit new construction outside of the 0 to 20 foot build to zone that is required in the Downtown Edge District per Article 4.4.1.c of the zoning regulations. And I'll stop there and ask if it is all right with everyone. I would suggest that we take the two variances at the same time. That should be voted on separately, but perhaps it's more efficient since they concern the same property to hear the presentation together. We will deliberate separately and feel free to ask questions separately. So with that, I will also open the public hearing on the second item that we have this evening, ZBA 2024-22. Petitioner George Hansel of Tailfeather Strategies requests a variance for property located at 57 Marlborough Street, tax map 590093000. This property is in the Downtown Edge District and is owned by Jared Goodell. The petitioner requests a variance to permit new construction within 20 feet of the minimum interior side setback that is required when a parcel in the Downtown Edge District abuts a parcel in the Downtown Transition District per Article 4.4.1.e of the zoning regulations. Now that I've managed to get through that, could we hear from city staff?
Certainly. Evan Clements, planner. Subject property is an existing 0.3 acre land locked parcel with access to Marlborough Street via a private road named Aliber Place. The parcel contains an existing three-family dwelling and parking area. The property is zoned downtown edge, which is subject to a form-based dimension requirements. Unlike traditional yard setbacks, the parcel has a build-to zone of 0 to 20 feet from the front lot line. A build-to zone is the area on a lot measured perpendicularly from the lot line within which a structure must locate. A build-to zone sets a minimum and maximum dimension within which the building facade line must be located. The parcel is also subject to a 20-foot side setback for the western property line since it abuts the downtown transition district, and a 25-foot rear setback for the southern property line since it abuts a residential zoning district. Subject property is adjacent to the downtown edge district to the northwest, north, and east, downtown transition to the west, and residential preservation to the south. Surrounding uses include the Historical Society of Cheshire County and Keene State Alumni Center to the west, residential duplex to the north and east, single family to the south, and multifamily and the Saving Bank of Walpole are located to the north on the other side of Marlborough Street. That's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you for the explanation of built-to-zone. I think that's the clearest explanation of it I've heard. These are, the proposal is for 3 duplexes.
That's correct.
So I guess my question is, why are we not seeing a variance from the definition of duplexes?
So an administrative written zoning determination was applied for by the applicant this evening, and the acting zoning administrator at the time ruled that, or came to the determination, I should say, that because this is a downtown zoning district that allows for multiple principal uses, the acting zoning administrator determined that each instance of a duplex was its own principal use. And because multiple principal uses are allowed, multiple duplexes are allowed on this lot.
Could we, we haven't seen that obviously, but could we please add a copy of that to the record?
I've got it in front of me. I could read it if you'd like.
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So I'm going to read the entire letter. Dear Mr. Hansel, we are in receipt of your request for a written interpretation of the City of Keene zoning regulations. In response to your request, this letter shall serve as a written zoning interpretation. You, representing the owner, submitted a request for an interpretation of use standards impacting potential development on 2 parcels. The first located at 57 Marlborough Street, located in the Downtown Edge District, TMP 590-093-000, and the second, 3 Aliber Place, located in the Residential Preservation District, TMP 590-092-000. The proposal is to merge these lots and construct 3 duplexes on the portion of the parcel that is located within the Downtown Edge District. This would result in a single lot with a single-family home located in the Residential Preservation District, a multifamily structure, and 3 duplexes located in the Downtown Edge District. Article 8, Section 831E defines dwelling 2-family/duplex as one building on a single lot containing 2 independent dwelling units, which is designed, occupied, or intended for occupancy by 2 separate families. There are no use standards associated with this use definition. This definition implies that the use is tied to the structure, or in other words, each duplex on a lot would be a separate principal use. Furthermore, Section 813 of Article 8, Multiple Principal Uses, states, with the exception of lots located in a residential zoning district, a lot may contain more than one principal use so long as each use is allowed in the zoning district unless otherwise specified in this LDC. According to Table 4.1 of the article of the LDC, dwelling 2-family duplex is an allowed use within the Downtown Edge District. Since the Downtown Edge District is not a residential zoning district as specified in Table 2.1 of the LDC, it is my interpretation that multiple duplexes are allowed on a single lot within this district. And then it goes on to cite the appeal period RSA and contact information regarding any questions with this interpretation.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful to have that spelled out because you're probably one of the few experts on what's where in this. And it's not the easiest thing to cross-reference. Perhaps the next time that they do an update, I might suggest that they clarify how that fits into the rest of it with all the zones, because it does seem pretty blanket, the way it's written. Thank you. Anybody have any other questions for Mr. Clement? Nope. In that case, can we hear from the applicant? Mr. Hansel.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, George Hansel, Tail Feather Strategies, on behalf of the owner, Jared Goodell. I want to thank the board and the staff for setting up this special meeting. I really appreciate you doing that and coming tonight so we can get this project, keep this project rolling. And as you mentioned, Madam Chair, this is a bit of an unusual circumstance. Our first, and just as a little background, our first thing we had to do was get some clarification from the zoning administrator on whether or not this would be allowed and what we'd have to do to get this permitted. That process has taken place. We also had to request from the city council that they allow for us to build on a lot that has no frontage, which is actually a state RSA that has that requirement. And so we've been through that process, and the city council on August 1st voted to allow us to do that in this instance. And so now this is the step that we need to take to request a couple of variances to deal with this sort of unique lot. And just to give you some clarification on, and a lay of the land, so to speak, on the drawing here, this is Marlborough Street. These three parcels right now are all owned by Mr. Goodell, and this project seeks to build 3 new duplexes, adding 6 units of housing to this area. As part of the project, Mr. Goodell is going to voluntarily merge 3 Aliber Place with 57 Marlborough Street, creating one lot that will have the existing three family on it, the 3 new duplexes, and a single family home towards the rear of the lot. We have 3 requests of you tonight. The first 2 are variances having to do with setbacks. The third request is for some relief from the parking requirement, a reduction in the number of parking spaces that we're going to provide. If it suits the board and the chair, I'll just start to go through the variance criteria for the first 2, but I'm going to focus on going through one at a time just to kind of keep it straight.
That's fine. And I also, again, I'm not in this chair usually. I forgot the disclaimer, which is that you are entitled to a 5-member board, and we only have 3 members. I want to make sure that you're aware of that. And the other is that because we have a 3-member board and it takes 3 votes in favor to approve the application, that if it's 2 to 1, you don't have an opportunity to come back unless it's substantially different from the application that you're proposing today. And I apologize for not saying that earlier.
No problem. We are aware of that.
Yeah, Madam Vice Chair, just a point of clarification, if there isn't a unanimous action with 3, we actually need to continue the application to the next meeting. It's not a final decision.
Thank you.
So if I can, thank you very much. So this first one is really looking to seek relief from the 0 to 20 foot build 2 requirement. That would require new development on this parcel to be within 20 feet of Marlborough Street, which we decided is the access to this property. And if you look at the map, that 0 to 20 foot zone is not on the subject property, making it pretty difficult to build there. We understand this is a unique case where we don't have street frontage, But we think that this is actually a perfect example of where a variance is required, because there is no possibility of actually building on someone else on a different parcel. These duplexes are going to be pretty small. They're pretty small size, and it really presents a unique opportunity to create a sort of new housing type that's really desperately needed here in Keene. And so, let's see. Beyond the description, granting of the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. So this creates 6 new workforce housing units. These units are going to be marketed towards people in the workforce. They're close to downtown, walking distance to lots of amenities, and it's a really desperately needed housing type here in the city. It also promotes infill development and quote-unquote smart growth practices, which you'll see throughout the master plan as things that we are trying to promote in the city of Keene. And it's also, we looked at a bunch of different configurations on this parcel because it is so unusual. We thought about how we could best place these new buildings on the lot. And we came to this conclusion because locating these 3 where they are really reduces their visibility from the public right away. And that does 2 things. That makes it so the impact to the surrounding neighborhood is going to be less. It also provides some privacy for the eventual residents of these new areas. The other reason why we selected this location here is because it's going to allow us to create some new green space as a part of this project. So right now, this is where these buildings are, and this whole sort of lawn will be a new lawn area, is kind of deteriorating concrete and asphalt, and we want to make sure that we create up to 3,000 new square feet of green space with this new development. So the variance, if the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. The 0 to 20 build to requirement, in all of my conversations around it as a city councilor and as mayor and serving on the planning board, and when we were talking about the land use code update and all of that, my understanding of it was that 0 to 20 foot requirement was really to provide for a consistent look and feel on the streetscape. So we wanted to make sure that in places of a bit more density, that you didn't have one building right up to the street and one building 20 or 30 feet back, something like that. So I don't think that awarding this variance is going to be contrary to the spirit of the ordinance, because there is an existing building along Marlborough Street that already provides for that consistency. And so putting in some buildings behind it aren't going to modify substantially what's there and that consistent look and feel that's there. Granting the variance would do substantial justice because, frankly, it just doesn't have frontage. So to allow for any sort of development, this variance needs to be granted. But I also, as I mentioned, I think this will do substantial justice to the neighborhood. It'll allow us to put these buildings, these new buildings, in an area that's not currently being used to its highest and best use. And it'll create some new housing options that are consistent in scale with the rest of the neighborhood. The other thing to think about as it relates to this variance request and the placement of these buildings is this is an area of the city that's kind of unusual. It's where 3 different distinct zoning areas come together. And so it's clearly like an edge. It's appropriately zoned in the downtown edge zoning district. But there are other zoning districts that all come in this area. And in some ways, this is sort of a transition zone between downtown and the much more residential areas to the east and south. And so we feel that the placement of these buildings is actually consistent with the spirit of the ordinance because it allows for that higher density, even though it's only over a span of 50 or 60 feet. It allows for that higher density to be up against closer to Main Street as opposed to closer to the east, where we're trying to provide that transition area. If the variance were granted, the values of the surrounding properties would not be diminished. We actually feel that this project is likely to at least keep the property values the same or improve the property values in this area. As I mentioned, this is sort of a underutilized spot with that's in need of some refreshing, and this is going to be a way to accomplish that and be consistent with what's currently in the neighborhood. The size and scale of these new buildings is also going to be consistent with other similar uses. So there are other buildings that are maybe not quite this footprint, but not very far off. We're not trying to put these sort of smaller cottages in an area where there are large homes or something that's wildly out of scale with the rest of the neighborhood. And so as far as it relates to the unnecessary hardship, this is a unique parcel. It doesn't have frontage, and it has, but it really does have a great opportunity to add this desperately needed housing. And so denial of this variance would constitute an unnecessary hardship because it prevents the owner from developing on their land and using it to its highest and best potential. No fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purposes of the ordinance provision and the specific application of the provision of the property. Again, it's really relates to the fact with this first variance request that there is no frontage here and that not granting the request really would serve no public purpose as we see it. And we feel this is a reasonable request because the addition of these buildings represents a creative, new, and exciting use for us to solve the city's housing crisis. So that's what I have for the first one. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that first variance request.
Just a quick question on the setbacks of the 3 units relative to the lot line in the green area.
Yep.
How does that shape up?
So that has to do with our second variance request,
Okay.
the interior lot lines, and I'll get into that.
I'll hold the question to there.
Thank you.
Can you turn on your microphone, please?
I thought I had, thank you. This application says that the lot size is 13016. I don't know, Mr. Hansel, maybe you can answer this too. Is that for the one lot or is that for the merged lots?
That would be probably the one lot.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. It wasn't clear to me, we'll get to the traffic study later, about where the 2 lots were being treated together and where they were being treated separately. Thank you. Well, if there are no other questions, why don't you go
Okay.
forward?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So with this second request, it's similar. I'll spare you all the sort of general overview of the project unless there are specific questions about that. This has to do with exactly the point that was brought up about these interior setbacks. And so what we're asking for here is relief from the interior setback requirement that would make us move the buildings 20 feet from the interior lot line. And we're looking to reduce that down to 5 feet. And that allows us to really tuck these buildings back into this underutilized area without really impacting the neighborhood very significantly. And so that's the rationale behind that. It allows us to create that new green space on the western side of this new joined lot, and also will allow us to keep this parking area consistent and in one place. If we wanted to comply with the ordinance as written, it would require us to really move these buildings in awkward places that would necessitate really difficult vehicular movement throughout the site, and I just don't think it would be the best solution here. So that led us to request this this variance. I included in the packet some renderings of what the what the new buildings would look like, basically from various points on adjoining properties and from the public right-of-way. And we really feel that this area where we've placed these buildings is going to provide for minimal impact to the rest of the neighborhood, including the most impacted parcels, which are over here and have the Historical Society, Cheshire County Historical Society, and then are actually owned by Keene State. So Keene State College's Alumni Center is here, the Historical Society is here, and this is another Keene State office building here. This is all parking. And one of the things you might notice from the rendering is that there already is quite a bit of vegetation in between the two parcels, so the visibility of the new construction is going to be pretty minimal, even from the parking lot. That picture on the screen was taken from the back door of the Historical Society. As it relates to the specific criteria, if you bear with me a second as I go through my notes. So granting the variance would not be in contrary to the public interest because it will create this new green space. It'll allow us to really use the parcel and design the project in a way that we think is going to work best for the neighborhood. Again, it will facilitate this new workforce housing that's pretty well established that we need. And it'll minimize the visual impact of the development from the public right-of-way. Really, you have to struggle to even see this new development from the public right-of-way, which I tried to do with some of the photos. But you'd really be looking from up here. This is currently TPI Staffing's office building. And so if you were right in front of that building looking back, you'd probably have the best visual shot of these new buildings, but it's still going to be sort of obstructed, even with us locating them 5 feet from the interior setback. Actually 5 feet from the property line, within the 20-foot interior setback area. So if the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. I do think that this serves the spirit of the ordinance. Granting the variance serves the spirit of this ordinance because, as I said, this is a real transitional area, truly on the downtown edge, and it's meant to provide a transition between much, much denser uses along Main Street and the more residential areas to the east, allowing us to locate these buildings and keep the building density to the western side of this new parcel accomplishes that. So that'll allow us to really be in line with the spirit of the ordinance. Granting of this variance will do substantial justice. In this case, it will do substantial justice. It'll allow for the new development, as I've said, but it'll also make the impact to the surrounding neighborhood as minimal as possible, providing privacy for their neighbors and providing privacy for the new residents of these buildings. It also, for all the similar reasons that I mentioned for the last variance, really do apply here. As it relates to the unnecessary hardship, this is a really unique property. The lack of frontage makes it difficult, and it's also important to note that this is sort of in the center of a block, so it's over 100 feet from the public street in any direction. And so this is unique in that way, and really to use it to its highest and best use, we need to get this relief. And as I mentioned before, it won't serve any public purpose to not grant these variances, and it would just lead to a project that's not as helpful to the neighborhood. No fair, and that results in no fair and substantial relationship existing between the general public purposes of the ordinance provision and the specific application of the provision to this property because of its unique characteristics. And overall, we feel this is a reasonable one. We worked very closely with the city staff, as Evan can attest, to try and get this project to a place where it could move forward. And we're very, very thankful for the work that's gone into this and for your time and attention as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I think, Mr. Guy, you had one that was held over from the other.
We talked about what is the actual setback to the lot line in the buildings? Is that
For the new
determined?
buildings,
For the new buildings. Yeah.
it's going to be 5 feet if we
Okay.
get this variance.
And how about the distance between the two new duplexes and the existing building that's going to be merged?
That, we are making sure that every building on the site has at least 5 feet of separation, and that's for fire.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, great, thank you.
That was one of my questions, was the separation between the three duplexes. And you said that was 5 feet?
That's correct.
Okay, that's all that fire code requires?
Yep.
Wow.
You could actually have them closer, you just have to upgrade the walls.
The firewall.
Yeah, but to have them be sort of normal walls, you need 5 feet of separation between the buildings.
Wow. Just as an aside, having been in Colorado, and watched a subdivision go up where the requirement was 10 feet between buildings, 5 feet doesn't provide too much protection. But that has nothing to do with your application. So is the existing three-family structure is going to remain, is that correct?
That's correct.
I have to admit, I'm taking time because it's a difficult project to try and understand, at least for me. And the access from Marlborough Street, could you point that out?
Certainly. So this is the main driveway that comes into the site. Everything is existing pretty much except for these three buildings. So if I put my hand over that, everything else on the site is existing more or less today. The parking, one thing I didn't mention, the parking on the site today is a little bit haphazard. And so one of the things we also hope to accomplish with this is to sort of straighten out where the parking should be.
So is, excuse me, so the access, that's Albert Place, which is a private way?
Yep. This is Albert Place. So right here. It goes along the western side of the neighboring property, 67 Marlborough Street, and goes back to serve the single-family home back here. So right now, as it exists today, this extends back here, and the residents in the single-family home actually park near their front entrance. But this way, the merging of these two lots will allow us to create a more contiguous parking situation on the site.
Does Mr. Goodell own the rights underneath Albert Place?
Yes.
Okay.
All three parcels are actually owned by Mr. Goodell.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Other questions?
I had that same question on I presume it's a right-of-way situation, and that's permanent to the deed of all the parcels?
Yeah, it's an
I presume.
existing private road.
Right.
So,
Okay.
So is the intent to actually sell these duplexes, or is it to rent them?
to rent them.
So except, well, I don't know the status of the single-family house, but the three-family and then these 6 units will all be rental properties?
Yep. They are all rental properties today.
Mr. Clough, do you have any questions?
No, they both seem pretty clear to me.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who is opposed to this application? Is there anybody else who would like to speak in favor of the application? Well, I guess I can skip the line about you responding to the public comments. If there are no other questions of the applicant, I will close the public hearing. All right, at this stage, we can deliberate, and I think we should deliberate separately on each one. I mean, it's a given that we're going to vote separately, but I also think we should deliberate separately. So I would entertain any comments that you might have. And we will take up, excuse me, ZBA 2024-21, just to make sure that it's clear. This is the application to vary from the build to zone requirement.
I'm comfortable with the aspect of adding additional housing that the applicant intends. I think that's great, and it really weighs heavily in my mind. The unnecessary hardship, I'm comfortable with that as well, just to let you know, because the property is so unique. I think clearly it meets that standard as well, both parts, in my mind.
All right, well, I'd like to go back to, excuse me, the first criteria, that it not be contrary to the public interest, and I think that's probably what you were getting at when you say it's going to add additional housing units when we have a shortage. And I agree with the applicant that it clearly is something that is intended to promote the infill development. I don't know if it'll minimize the visual impact. I'm not sure that that's actually necessary to prove the point that it's in the public interest. Mr. Clough, do you have any comment?
No, I agree with the presentation. Because of the location of it, it's one of those situations, the variance addresses an issue that would have to be addressed for anybody to do anything residential there.
Second criteria is if the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. It's related in this case, I think, to the first criteria, because the ordinance is intended, especially when it was rewritten a couple of years ago, it was intended to encourage underutilized property that was in the city center. I think this qualifies as being city center. So I definitely think that it is consistent with what the city was trying to do when it revised its ordinances, and especially created all these separate downtown ordinances. Third criteria, granting the variance would do substantial justice because, and here we have the weighing criteria, that the benefit to the applicant should not be outweighed by the harm to the general public. And I think it's probably a wash, because the applicant, if it gets built and occupied, is definitely going to benefit. And the city will probably benefit from having more housing. The fourth criteria, variance were granted, values of the surrounding property would not be diminished. To my way of thinking, we don't have any particular evidence of that, but I think we have a little common sense. And if you add green space and build attractive properties, it generally has the impact of increasing the value, not diminishing it. Anybody else? Okay.
I'll just agree with that. It's that we don't have many places in Keene that would be kind of like a little bit of a maze or a warren or something, but that sort of undifferentiated area there, defining it in more specific ways, I think is going to improve what little of it we could see from the road would still look better, and especially the abutters, it would have no impact on them. So I agree.
And then we come to the unnecessary hardship. That's the one, as you know, that I always struggle with. I do agree that the excuse me, characteristics of the property, of this parcel, are unique, but I'm not absolutely positive it translates into a hardship, is that I'm not sure it prevents any new development. Could it, and again, we don't need to do things for a developer, but could it be utilized with 2 duplexes, 1 duplex, some other way? I mean, I guess what I'm looking at is that it's not a requirement that however a property owner defines full utilization doesn't necessarily by itself create a hardship. In this case, I think that this is a very strange parcel. Yeah, I defy anybody to find a similar one in the city.
Madam Vice Chair?
Yeah.
Isn't the unnecessary hardship the 0 to 20 rule versus, I know there's a comment about full utilization, but to me, the hardship for this property is the requirement of the 0 to 20 rule and the unique interface between that rule and the structure of this property. That's where I was going with this.
Right, and I see your point, but I also think that it happens also because of the nature of the development. It doesn't mean that the property is not unique in its setting. Then you have to decide whether or not there's a relationship between how this development is being proposed and the way the ordinance is written. And I think that goes to your point, that there may not be a relationship between this 0 to 20 as applied to this particular property.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Clough?
This is always the oddest question to address. I think the placement of the property, no matter what you wanted to do with it, would create situations of somebody coming in before us. Because I think residential use in that area is a pretty logical one. And to do anything, to put anything on that lot other than what's there already, somebody would have to come before us. So I think that the condition for me for the hardship is that the placement of the property is so odd. That you really, and again, you can't change geography. So it's kind of stuck there, out of time, out of place, so.
And the last bit we have to look at is whether or not the project is reasonable.
I would say yes, it is. Again, the area has a number of residential units, and adding to the, it's a similar use, and it addresses a need that is acknowledged in the area. So, to me, that is a very reasonable use.
I agree.
Madam Vice Chair, may I ask a
Yes.
question?
We haven't started voting yet, so yes.
Okay, just for the, Mr. Guy, are you saying that you don't believe there's any way that this property could be expanded to meet that 0 to 20? Is that what you meant? Just-
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
think
trying to
the
write
0
things
to
down.
20 rule is what's creating the hardship for this piece, whether it's 1 duplex, 2 duplex, 3 or more. That factor is always going to be there because of the adjacencies, and unless I'm not understanding that rule correctly.
So just the rule is from the front property line 20 feet in.
Right.
That's where the building needs to sit.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
Do you have any other comments? All right, well, in that case, I will do my best to get the voting straight, but I need a motion from someone first.
I'll make a motion that we approve ZBA 2024-21, a variance for a property located at 57 Marlborough Street, tax map 590-093-000 in the Downtown Edge District, requesting a variance to permit new construction outside of the 0 to 20-foot build-to zone that is required in the Downtown Edge District per Article 4.4.1.c of the zoning regulations.
I will second that.
Thank you. All right, granting the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. All those in favor? Unanimous. Granting the variance will not violate the spirit of the ordinance. All those in favor? Granting the variance would do substantial justice. All those in favor? Again, unanimous. Granting the variance will not diminish the values of the surrounding properties. All those in favor? Again, unanimous. Owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship. All those in favor? Again, unanimous. And the proposal is reasonable. And everybody's in favor of that as well. So ZBA 2024-21 is approved. So now we'll move on to discussing ZBA 2024-22. And I know it may seem repetitive, but we need to create findings. Get to the right- Excuse me, I gotta make sure I've got the right one. All right, the first criteria, that granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. And again, this is to permit new construction within 20 feet of the minimum interior side setback that is required. And one thing I'd like to mention, suggest when we get to the motion, is that the applicant had mentioned, I think in response to a question you had, Mr. Guyat, that the intent is to locate the buildings within 5 feet of the setback. So when we get to a motion, if you want to just think about in the back of your mind, potentially putting a condition on it, that the setback be no, I guess the wording would be no less than 5 feet.
Yeah, or to allow for a 5-foot setback when a 20-foot setback is normally permitted.
Okay. Thank you. So back to the criteria. Again, I believe that the granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest, and in part because they back up to a parking lot. If they backed up to another house that was 10 feet from the lot line, I might be a little more concerned. And I doubt that either the college, I think the college and the Historical Society kind of both tend to use that parking lot. And with parking down there at a premium, I doubt whether they're going to build something on it. Famous last words, I realize, but. So, does anybody have any other comments on that?
I agree with you.
If the variance is granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. The spirit of the ordinance, I think, generally, I think with setbacks is a density issue. You know, over, what do you want to call it? Over construction or too much in many buildings in one area. In this case, again, because it's in the downtown area where properties and buildings tend to be closer together, whether it's because they're grandfathered or whether it's by right under the ordinance, and again, it's backing up to a parking lot. So I don't think that the spirit of the ordinance is violated. Anybody else?
I don't see any violation there.
Granting the variance would do substantial justice. Again, as I said earlier, that's the balancing test, whether the benefit to the applicant is not outweighed by harm to the general public. I don't see any harm at all to the general public on this one. I'd love to hear comments from somebody else.
I would say that that's true. I suspect that once construction is done, they're going to be very innocuous there. I don't think people will be complaining about, the general public is not going to be unduly concerned about this. Again, because of the placement of it, they're actually quite a ways away from the general public. And they certainly have no impact on parking areas.
And criteria 4, the variance is granted, values of the surrounding properties would not be diminished.
I agree that they would not be diminished. The empty parking lot now, somewhat compromised, pavement, excess vegetation, and so on, it's kind of in rough shape. Having the housing units in there and the additional green space, activity in that area versus just empty places, I think all help with property values. to the abutters.
And now we get to the unnecessary hardship. And I think we've all agreed so far that this is a unique site. I do question whether or not these buildings could be placed in compliance with the zoning ordinance. I don't have that kind of expertise to know. So I'm not entirely sure of the hardship on this, and I'd love to hear from somebody else.
Madam Chair, if the diagram that we have up on the screen is accurate, showing what would happen if they attempted to actually conform to some of the, some of the restrictions, it would make it difficult to make it a viable enterprise, I believe, and I think that's why they came up with the solutions that they came up with. It's an odd shape, so that makes it really hard to locate any sort of building on it, and yet also have parking and also have green space. And I think the shape of it is what really, it dictates why they're before us for this. If the shape were in, more regular, more square, rectangular, anything like that, you would have a much easier time placing things. But this irregular shape makes it quite a challenge.
I'll add that enforcing the 20-foot setback could potentially, we don't know with certainty, but could potentially reduce the number of units that you could fit on that site, making it economically challenging to develop and operate that down the line. So I see that as a hardship as well.
Yeah, just as a reminder that the economics of it are a consideration, but they're not a determining factor. So that depends on how much weight you want to give it. Any other comments on any of the criteria? If not, then we will proceed to entertaining a motion.
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we approve ZBA 2024-22 for the property located at 57 Marlborough Street, tax map 590-093-000, located in the Downtown Edge District, owned by Jared Goodell, to permit the new construction within 20 feet of the minimum interior side setback as required, that is required when a parcel is in the Downtown Edge District, abuts a parcel in Downtown Transition District per Article 4.4.1E of the zoning regulations. I would also add an item that that the property would be allowed the 5-foot minimum when a 20-foot minimum is normal.
Okay, do you think it would be better if you incorporated that into the motion itself, or do you want that as a separate condition?
No, as part of the motion.
Okay. Is that clear enough for you, or?
What do you think?
We can clean that up in post, as they say.
Yeah, you can edit.
I'll second.
Okay, so the motion is to approve ZBA 2024-22. And this one is to permit a variance from the required 20-foot minimum interior side setback. The condition that we would be allowing for a 5-foot setback where 20 feet is permitted. Okay, so first criteria, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. All those in favor? Unanimous. If the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed. All those in favor? Unanimous. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. All those in favor? Again, unanimous. 4, if the variance were granted, the values of the surrounding properties would not be diminished. All those in favor? And owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, denial of the variance would result in unnecessary hardship. All those in favor? Again, unanimous, and that the application is reasonable. All those in favor? Again, unanimous. So ZBA 2024-22 is approved. So I guess we are going to move on to ZBA 2024-23. Petitioner George Hansel of Tailfeather Strategies requests a special exception for property located at 57 Marlborough Street, tax map 590-093-000. Property is in the Downtown Edge District and is owned by Jared Goodell. The petitioner requests a special exception to permit a major parking reduction per Article 9.2.7.c of the zoning regulations. And Mr. Clement.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Evan Clements, planner. This is a little more straightforward, thankfully. In the Downtown Edge and residential preservation zoning districts, each dwelling unit is required to have 2 parking spaces. The applicant has submitted a traffic and parking analysis for the subject parcel at 57 Marlborough Street, 59 Marlborough Street, which is the parcel to the north, with the frontage on Marlborough Street, and the parcel to the south, which is 3 Albert Place. The existing and proposed uses have a combined parking requirement of 18 spaces. The applicant is requesting a reduction to provide 13 parking spaces in total. And I'll let the applicant go into the details on this, but the reason why sort of staff and the applicant both agree that just the unique existing conditions of the 3 parcels, they are fundamentally connected to each other. And so looking at the parking analysis and the reduction as a whole, it just makes more practical sense. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So I'm just doing a parking space count. It's not super clear on the print that we have. And I'd like to understand if we have, maybe the color chart will help, the relationship between 59 Marlborough Street's parking. Where is that located?
So 59, so the property line actually intersects this top part of the
Right.
parking area.
Yep.
And so part of this reconfiguration, these 2 spots would be more or less designated for 59 Marlborough Street.
For 59, okay. And those are the first 2 that appear on the map with the property line going through the middle of
That's
one of
correct.
them?
Yep.
Okay. So across there are 4 spaces,
Across there are 4 total
if I
spaces.
count them correctly.
Yep.
So that, when I add up the rest, I get to 13,
Right.
because we've got 7 across that lateral portion at the base of 57, and then 2 next to the dumpster.
Correct.
Do I have that correct? And the 13 versus was it 18?
Yeah, at 2 parking spaces per unit for all
Right.
3 lots.
For all
It's
3
18, yeah.
spaces. So that included property 59 Marlboro in that parking space count. Okay, just so I
That's
understand
correct.
how that fits. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Clement? Okay, well, then we'll hear from the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. George Hansel, Tail Feather Strategies, on behalf of the owner, Jared Goodell. So, I wish something was like easy on this project or easy to explain, but when you have 3 different parcels in the same place with the same owner, lots of stuff going on, I guess, it certainly gets confusing and takes a little while. So I appreciate you all sort of going through this exercise that I've gone through over the last couple months to understand how this is going to work. We are requesting here a major parking reduction, so there would normally be 2 spots required for each residential unit. And I would encourage you, as Mr. Clements said, to sort of think about how this works with these 3 parcels. Even though 59 Marlboro Street is not technically part of this application, it's separate. That's the frontage to Marlboro Street. Every single person and every resident of these back units is going to have to go through there. And so what we're trying to accomplish here is a more contiguous parking arrangement for the future with this new development. Important to note, this is right on the downtown edge. If we were 50 or something feet to the west, I don't think there would be a parking requirement necessarily, because it would be part of the downtown core area where there are lots of residential units that don't have any parking requirement. And so this truly does represent a transition area. This is between that residential stuff to the east and the high density to the west. Let me make sure I have that right. I think that's right. My east and west. So what we're asking for here is somewhat of an accommodation to be respective of that fact that this is within walking distance to the co-op and some public transportation that we have. It's close to the rail trail. These are also really small units. The ones we're building are 350-ish square feet, and they're really not suitable for a big family with multiple vehicles. They're going to be marketed for workforce and single people that are looking for an affordable housing option where they can walk down to the co-op and get their groceries, or maybe even work downtown, something like that. And so we feel that that's the reason why we're asking for this accommodation. And just to address the specific criteria outlined in the Land Development Code, the unique characteristics of the site that we discussed tonight, but also the fact that it is in proximity to all these. This is a very walkable neighborhood, and we're in close proximity to Main Street and all of those amenities. We feel that the requirement of 2 spots per housing unit is too restrictive. It just doesn't make sense. I don't think that even if we did provide this parking, that there would be many people taking advantage of it, just because these are economical units that won't house many, many people. The reduction will not cause long-term parking problems for adjacent properties or anticipated future uses. Another thing to think about is this section of 3 parcels is all residential. There are no commercial uses here, and we don't expect this area to be used for any commercial any commercial uses. So everyone going onto the site from here is presumably going to be going to their home or visiting somebody who lives here. And we feel that that's going to limit any potential impacts to the surrounding properties. The next criteria, section 4.1, the nature of the proposed application is consistent with the spirit and intent of the zoning regulations, this LDC and the city's comprehensive master plan, and complies with all the applicable standards in the LDC for the particular use. We really feel it does. As we talked about, again, I hate to be repetitive, but this is infill development. And this area of the city specifically has been targeted over the last decade to create walkable neighborhoods. Every conversation that I've been involved with on the legislative side, deciding how we were going to regulate this part of the city, was to create a walkable neighborhood where we could preserve the residential character of the neighborhood, but also make it accessible and walkable. And I think that this development really encapsulates a lot of those sentiments and tries to accomplish that. Section 4.2, the proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated as to not to endanger the public health, safety, or welfare. We feel that this won't endanger the public health, safety, or welfare. In fact, reconfiguring this existing condition and better defining the parking is going to make it a much safer site for the current residents and the future residents. .4, the proposed use will be of a character that does not produce noise, odors, glare, or vibration that adversely affects the surrounding area. We're not expecting to do any of those things after construction. 4.5, the proposed use will not place an excessive burden on public improvements, facilities, services, or utilities. So we're not expecting that the addition of these 6 new housing units is going to pose an excessive burden, or this parking reduction is going to propose or is going to have any kind of excessive burden on public facilities or services or utilities. This has gone through the normal process as it relates to water and sewer evaluation, and with our emergency services to make sure that it's an accessible site as configured. Section 4.6, the proposed use will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any feature determined to be of significant natural, scenic, or historic importance. That evaluation has been done, and we don't feel that this is going to impact any of the historic value of the area. 4.7, the proposed use will not create a traffic safety hazard or substantially increase the level of traffic congestion in the city. So we did supply a letter and a study from a licensed traffic engineer, and they determined that even with the addition of these 6 units, it doesn't rise anywhere close to the level to cause traffic congestion. Actually far less than 100 trips per hour, which would be the regularly identified threshold for getting out of normal ebb and flow, I guess is the best way to put it. And so our traffic engineer felt like we were well below that threshold. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Basically we feel that the fact that these are small units that aren't going to get any bigger, they're going to be targeted for single people or maybe a pair of people. And our traffic engineer came back and gave us the thumbs up, so to speak, to say that the proposed plan was not going to have any significant impacts on the community at large. We feel this is a reasonable request, and we appreciate your time and attention.
Mr. Hensel, I think you may have skipped over what in your materials is section 4-3?
That's very possible. Oop. That's the trouble of using a highlighter to give yourself notes. Sometimes you miss them. But thank you for that. 4-3, the proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated so as to be harmonious with the surrounding area and not to impede the development, use, or enjoyment of adjacent property. Bottom line, we think these improvements are actually going to make it more defined, that this is the parking area for this property. It's going to help with what is now a kind of confusing situation where the property lines are not very well defined, and the surface, the parking surface itself, is pretty deteriorated. So we think this is actually going to help things in the neighborhood. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, mostly based on your materials, going back to the beginning of the additional criteria. You had said generally that the uses operate in harmony with each tenant finding a regular spot to park. Are you talking about both of the property or all three of the properties at the moment?
That was my personal observation, just assessing the property. Is it's, for lack of a better term, it's a bit of a free-for-all among the residents of all those properties, and I think they'll be well served by having this get repaved, striped, and a better understanding of where they should park.
Put some structure into their life?
Yeah.
So I guess the question I have from that is about how many parking spaces are there now? I know it's, as you say, it's a free-for-all and they aren't well-defined. but-
So one of the other things to mention is, right now there's like there are big concrete blocks, basically, and so I don't think that this plan, the plan certainly doesn't take away parking spaces. It actually opens probably up a few new ones.
And I'm gonna get the numbers mixed up. Is it 67? That's the long,
67
Yeah.
is over here.
what is their access currently?
The property line isn't very defined at the back edge of the property, but they have their parking
Okay.
over here.
I didn't, it's kind of difficult to tell.
Yeah.
So I didn't know whether or not they access their parking through Albert Place or whether they have a direct.
They have a direct access to Marlborough
Okay.
Street on the eastern side of their property, or the building.
Do you know how many vehicles access these properties now on a regular basis?
I didn't do any counting necessarily when I was out there, but it's generally understood, or from what I understand from the property owner, right now the units have about a car each unit. So this is going to be consistent with what's there.
Are there other questions? I have some questions on the parking study, but I don't want to. Okay. Not being a traffic engineer, I just want to make sure I understand what I'm looking at. So, and I'll just pick on table 1, which in our packets is page 59 of 68. In that first column, it says single-family trips. And then if you look at the footnote, it talks about detached housing, and obviously we're not talking about detached housing as the materials state, and that they weren't necessarily, didn't have the ability to calculate that exactly. So on that column is that chart where it says like enter 5, exit 5, is that for each dwelling unit?
There's only one single-family detached home there on the site today, and so I think that's meant to represent what's existing there today at 3 Oliver Place.
Okay, but
And this
do
is,
the duplexes qualify then as multifamily?
the duplexes would, but this is, I believe, the one that says single-family trips, and this is if I'm interpreting it correctly, which I'm not a traffic engineer either. But I assumed when I read it that was referring to 3 Oliver Place as the only single-family property in use right now. And then the multifamily trips, as is being calculated here, would be representing the use at 57 Marlborough Street in the middle and 59 Marlborough Street.
So it doesn't include the potential, see, I thought it was also estimating what the potential would be for if you added in the 3
Yeah.
duplexes.
So those first 2 columns on table 1 are the existing uses. And the third column from the left is the projected new. And then the new total of the built-out site as we're proposing it is in the final right-hand column there.
Okay, all right, I see. Mr. Clemens?
I just wanted to say, basically, with trip generation, single family is the most intense trip use per dwelling unit, because there's an assumed sort of like scaling down in the amount of like vehicle ownership once you get into multifamily. So for a single family, it's 5 people going out and 5 people going back, and that's mom, dad, 3 kids. And so either that's one person doing multiple trips per day, that's all 5 people going out in their 5 cars and coming back in. And then as you scale up into multifamily, each dwelling unit in multifamily doesn't have that many access to like either parking spaces or vehicles or people. So that's why it's not like just an additive situation. You're not just adding 5 one-way trips for each dwelling unit. And then it looks like they used land use code for a low-rise multifamily for 5 dwellings and 6 dwellings. For the multifamily trips, B was a 5 dwelling, and then the additional site trips, as Mr. Hansel said, which is for the 6 duplexes, they considered that to be a 6 dwelling multifamily.
Okay. All right, thank you. That helps a lot, because it was kind of like, I wasn't sure what I was looking at.
Yeah, traffic and parking reports are very conservative when they do their analysis. It's very much a what's the most intense scenario for traffic generation and parking usage.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions for Mr. Hansel? Hearing none. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to the application? Seeing none, is there anybody who would like to speak in support of the application? Is there anybody who wants to say anything at all? With that, I guess I will close the public hearing. And we will proceed to deliberations. And we have the 2 that are required criteria for the parking reduction, in addition to the more standard special exception criteria. So perhaps, just for clarity, we should go through each one, if that makes sense. So let's handle the two that are required for the parking, specifically for the parking reduction. So the first is the specific use or site has such characteristics that the number of required parking spots is too restrictive. Does anybody have any comment on that one? Yes.
I think, again, based on the plans and the, even though it is 6 units that are being added, they are, as was pointed out, about 320 square feet each, which is very, very small. Not likely, I mean, certainly 2 people would be feeling pretty, pretty full in terms of filling out the space, but one person probably would feel much more comfortable, which would indicate that there probably will not be 2 parking spaces utilized per unit. If the units were bigger, it would possibly make me question the number of units, number of parking spaces that they're asking for, but I was noticing how small these apartments are in the first place.
Yeah, I think my only concern in this area was, frankly, winter parking. And even though there's a comment in the materials, overnight parking permits are available in city-owned parking lots and garages within a 10-minute walk from the proposed development. That's great, unless, well, maybe we won't have any more winters with 4 feet of snow and 10 below, because I'm not sure how willing people are going to be to use it. But I guess that's going to be up to whoever rents these units and see how many parking tickets they want to get. But that really was my my major concern about it. The requested reduction will not cause long-term parking problems for adjacent properties or anticipated future uses. Well, I think once this property is built out, I suspect there are going to be very limited future uses. Again, I'm of mixed mind on whether or not there'll be long-term parking problems. I don't really know if we're equipped to make a judgment on that. Anybody else?
I agree. I don't think we're in a position to judge that. Would need more study to ascertain the effect there.
Well, and I'm quite sure if this is all built out, that if there are long-term parking problems, I'm quite sure the landlord will hear about it. Moving on to the standard considerations for special exception. Is the proposed application consistent with the spirit and intent of the zoning regulations, the LDC, and the master plan, and complies with all applicable standards for this particular use? I think it's consistent with the spirit and intent in that, again, we go back to the infill development, but also, as Mr. Clough noted, the very small size of the units are simply not conducive to large families with 3 vehicles apiece. So in that regard, I think it's consistent. I don't know if anybody else has comments?
Yeah, I agree with that observation.
The proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated so as to not endanger the public health, safety, or welfare. Well, it's definitely off-street parking, and it's away from the public street, so it's not going to really impact that based on the traffic studies. I don't think there's going to be much impact to the public unless the tenants fight with each other over the parking spaces, but that's not the general public. If it was, excuse me, if it was directly abutting on Marlborough Street, well, first of all, we wouldn't be here. But secondly, I think that might create a problem, but I don't see it in this case. Let's see, the next one will be established, maintained, and operated to be harmonious with the surrounding areas and will not impede development, use, and enjoyment of adjacent property.
Given that the other properties are primarily parking in nature, I don't see how this development and the parking challenge here is going to affect those in any way, shape, or form.
Right, and on the, okay, I'm gonna get confused with my directions. The abutter on the west side is TPI. The abutter directly north is owned by Mr. Goodell. That doesn't prohibit it being developed for something else. And then the abutter on the east side is residential. So I don't see that it's gonna have a negative effect on the area. Actually, it might be positive if it produces some order to a chaotic parking situation. Proposed use will not produce noise, odors, glare, vibration that adversely affects the surrounding area. And as Mr. Hensel noted, that doesn't include construction. Any comments?
Typically, residential units don't generate any of those issues. And, you know, even if these were maxed out, it wouldn't have had that issue in the first place. So this is even less. So it's reducing anything of that nature.
And if they're rented to college students, the city has enacted some ordinances that help control things when they get out of hand. Proposed use will not place an excessive burden on public improvements, facilities, services, or utilities. I think the services and utilities are all there. I mean, they may need to be expanded, but that's the developer's concern and how he deals with the city. I don't see that as being impactful on anything else in the area. The proposed use will not result in the destruction, loss, damage of any feature determined to be of significant natural, scenic, or historic importance. Might improve the scenic view. Historic value, there was, the building that TPI is in may have some historic value, but that's not this site. The proposed use will not create a traffic safety hazard or substantial increase in the level of traffic congestion in the vicinity of the use. I can actually see if you put 6 more units back there, I can actually see some potential for issues with left-hand turns out of Albert Place. It's really a planning board issue, but, you know, it's right where, just beyond where Marlborough Street has that big curve. That's the only traffic issue I see. I don't know. But again, planning board should probably, you know, take a look at that. Does anybody,
I would expect that the school hours and bank traffic would be the things that would be impacted the most. And again, this is a very small number of vehicles when you take all that into consideration. So they just have to be patient drivers.
good luck. Let's see if we- I
Madam-
think those are
Madam
all-
Vice Chair?
Yes.
If I could just make a note, the traffic report stated that the 3 new duplexes are gonna generate about 2 or 3 additional trips per peak hour versus what is existing on the site.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, we've seen a number of traffic studies before you were here that were completely inaccurate. So you have to use some common sense at the same time. Do you have any other comments? Okay, well, we'll entertain a motion on ZBA 2024-23.
I move that we accept ZBA 2024-23, a special exception for property located at 57 Marlborough Street, tax map number 590-093-000, a special exception to permit the major parking reduction per Article 9.2.7.c of the zoning regulations.
I'll second that.
Thank you. So the first criteria, the specific use of the site has such characteristics that the number of required parking spots is too restrictive. All those who agree are in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. The requested reduction will not cause long-term parking problems for adjacent properties or anticipated future uses. All those in favor? Again, unanimous. The nature of the proposed application is consistent with the spirit and intent of the zoning regulations, its LDC, and the city's comprehensive master plan, and complies with all applicable standards in this LDC for this particular use. All those in favor? Unanimous? The proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated so as to not endanger the public health, safety, or welfare. Everybody who is agreeing, approving, unanimous? The proposed use will be established, maintained, and operated so as to be harmonious with the surrounding areas and will not impede the development, use, and enjoyment of adjacent property. All those approve? Unanimous? The proposed use will be of a character that does not produce noise, odors, glare, and/or vibration that adversely affects the surrounding area. All those in favor? Unanimous? The proposed use will not place an excessive burden on public improvements, facilities, services, or utilities. Those in favor? Again, unanimous? The proposed use will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any feature determined to be of significant natural, scenic, or historic importance. Those in favor? Unanimous? And the last one, the proposed use will not create a traffic safety hazard or a substantial increase in the level of traffic congestion in the vicinity of the use. All those in favor? Unanimous, and then I guess on the main motion, all those in favor? And that's unanimous as well. So, get the numbers straight. ZBA 2024-23 is approved. Do we have any new business?
No new business.
Communications, miscellaneous?
Nope, nothing.
Nothing, okay. Anything else? Okay, I guess, just as a reminder, our next regular meeting is September 3rd?
Yep, September 3rd, it's a Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday. So, with that, I guess we are adjourned. Thank you very much.